You tell stories of over 50 women that have had 5 or more children. In today's culture, that's considered radical. What first stirred in your heart to write this book? What was that moment?
I opened the book with this really profound thing that happened to me on a train. Stranger on a train. I was riding home from, I think it was an academic conference, and I had my 6th baby in a wrap, kind of strapped to my chest. And just his little head and his peach fuzz was sticking out. The people on the train said, wow, baby, is it your first? And this is a common question you get. I still don't understand the reason people ask this question. When you have a lot of kids, you have a countercultural number of children, you kind of brace yourself. So I can either tell a white lie and say, you're like, oh yeah, it is, and just end the conversation, but I don't like to lie. But if you say the truth, you're gonna get it. Something's gonna happen. So I said, no, he's my 6th. And then I got this shocking response. And the lady said, wow, I guess your husband still wants you. And that was, for me, it was just, it's a tragic response, because of course it's coming from someplace. It's coming from someplace that's hurt. I don't even think I answered the question.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.
Welcome to We the People, the show where we celebrate faith, family, and freedom through the voices of Americans who are shaping culture, not running from it. Today's guest is a force. She's a Harvard-trained economist, a professor at Catholic University, and a mother of 8. Yes, 8 children. Catherine Ruth Pollak is so compelling. It's not just her resume that shines. It's her clarity, her courage, and her conviction that some of the most important choices we can make in life are the ones the world least understands. Her new book, Hannah's Children, The Women Quietly Defying the Birth Dearth, is more than a collection of interviews. It's a cultural wake-up call. While politicians debate falling birth rates like they're just a numbers game, Catherine went out and talked to the women who are actually living the solution, mothers of large families whose faith and joy are in open rebellion against our culture of self, and their stories will stop you in your tracks. Our conversation will hit on everything we care about here: the future of the family, the role of women, and the calling of motherhood as a bold countercultural act. Our talk will discuss why policy alone can't fix what's broken, why faith is often the missing link in the conversation about fertility, and what it means to live a life that prioritizes legacy over applause. If you've ever worried whether it's still possible to live a life of purpose and joy in a world that seems to reward cynicism and self-interest, this episode is for you. Catherine, welcome to We the People.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So we're going to talk about all the things this show celebrates, but we're going to do it through the stories of strong women, motherhood, and a cultural conversation that we need at this time. So I read your bio in the intro there. You have a fascinating resume. Harvard economist, professor at Catholic University, mother of 8. I would argue that that's probably the most impressive thing in your bio. And now you have this deeply countercultural book. You're the author of this amazing work that we have right here on the table. That combination doesn't really fit neatly into the current narratives in society: motherhood, culture, all these things that bring us meaning. So why did you write the book, and why do you think the book was needed now?
Yeah. Well, I wrote the book really to answer a question. And before I even say what the question is, I sort of need to point out that people ask the wrong question. And this was a big piece of this project. So you said, why this book now? I started this book 10 years ago. And actually, the birth rate and marriage rate declines have been so much more grave in the last 10 years that actually it's turned out, and it was just providential that it's turned out to be the right book at the right time in a lot of ways. But here's what I mean about the question. The question everybody's asking is, why are birth rates falling? Why are people not having children? And the question I think we should be asking is, why would anybody have children? Why did anybody ever have children? And then, of course, I present the answers that are given by a lot of the people I interviewed. And I think that sets up the conversation really, really well. So why would you have a child? The prevailing assumption, we could go back to the Malthusians, we could think about Paul Ehrlich and the population bomb and this entire, kind of scare tactics about overpopulation. That entire worldview is predicated on the idea that people just reproduce like animals. And that we can always expect them to just reproduce. And if you give them more food and more money, they'll have more babies, right? But we know that this is not true. It hasn't happened. But that hidden assumption is what has to be really attacked, because the the minute you start to think about kind of marriage and childbearing as things that just happen, things you can just count on, you're going to get a whole bunch of other things wrong. And you can think about, for instance, I mean, not the most important things, but you can think about, for instance, things like the Social Security Administration, Medicare, Medicaid, entitlement programs. All of those things are built on the back of a basic assumption that people will just have children, right? And that turns out to be tragically wrong, tragically, because right now we're sort of facing this massive policy correction where we are going to have to correct these things because people don't just have children.
We're going to talk about government and its role and all of this that tends
Yes.
to come up on this show a lot.
Yeah.
But I want to continue to talk about the book,
Yeah.
Hannah's Children. It's beautifully written. It's deeply moving. It's honest. It's revolutionary in its simplicity.
Yeah.
You tell stories of over 50 women that have had 5 or more children. In today's culture, that's considered radical. But what first stirred in your heart to write this book? What was that moment?
Yeah. That moment, if I'm being honest, was I opened the book with this this really profound thing that happened to me on a train. A stranger on a train. I was riding home from I think it was an academic conference, and I had my 6th baby in a wrap, kind of strapped to my chest, and just his little head and his peach fuzz was sticking out. He, looked a little bit like you, and of course he's cuter than you are. But so the ladies on
Wow,
the train,
two shots in
two
one.
shots in one.
I'll take
right?
it.
Yeah,
I'll take it.
I'm there for it. The people on the train said, like, "Wow, baby, is it your first?" And this is a common question you get. I still don't understand the reason why people ask this question. And when you have a lot of kids, you have a countercultural number of children, you kind of brace yourself. So I can either tell a white lie and say, you're like, "Oh yeah, it is," and just end the conversation, but I don't like to lie. But if you say like the truth, you're going to get it. Something's going to happen. So I said, "No, he's my 6th." And then I got this shocking response. And the lady said, "Wow, I guess your husband still wants you." And that was, for me, it was just, it's a tragic response because, of course, it's coming from someplace. It's coming from someplace that's hurt. I don't even think I answered the question. But that was, if I had to pinpoint for this book, that was the beginning. And it was, and why? Why is it the beginning? Because I began to wonder about kind of the relationship between childbearing and the quality of people's marriages and the state of marriage in this country. And I had, I think like a lot of people, taken certain things for granted in my life, that I knew a lot of people with beautiful marriages and abundant families. And I thought, well, what is the right answer to that question? And what is the role of our openness to children, our willingness to have children, not just in my marriage personally, but in culture and in society? So that I didn't, certainly at that moment, I didn't think I would write a book, but I began to wonder, would it be possible to describe for a world that doesn't know what the inside of a marriage that's open to life, would it be possible to describe for that questioning lady on the train what it looks like in a way that she might not want to do this. She may not want my life, but she wouldn't think it's irrational, that she could say, well, that's interesting. And that was the beginning. So I thought about it for a long time after that.
There's just this perception in society that, no one has that many kids. Even vehicles got larger over a certain number of years, and then they just sort of stopped. You can't go any bigger than a Suburban. We may have a friend sitting off camera right now that has 7, 8 kids. And I know the vehicle she drives, it looks like she's pulling up to a house to fix someone's plumbing. It's just, we need to create environments that are more open to these size families and make the environment more welcoming for them. I've never seen a jogging stroller with more than 2 seats in it. And, I know friends that want to go jogging with their 3 and 4 and 5 kids.
Right.
One of the themes of your book that I love is faith. You sort of emphasize the theology of motherhood. And you do this by capturing these family stories and talk about this theology that's sort of disappearing in our culture. So how did faith shape the decisions that these mothers made to have 5 and more children? And how did they do that while dealing with criticism, ridicule? What were the conversations like around that?
Okay, so there's a lot of ways to think about that question. And of course, the cheeky answer is, you have to read all the stories before you could really see how this works, right? We've got women who are Jewish, Baptist, Mormon, Catholic, like a lot of different faiths. But let's back up a little bit. If you were to pick a guy on the street who'd never known that anybody had like as many kids as could fill up a van, and you said like, well, why would anybody do that? you're going to typically get an answer that relates to ignorance. Maybe these people are ignorant. They don't know how to not have children. They've got nothing better to do. And these are some of the sort of false narratives around having children today. It's one of, as you said, was one of the reasons people get mocked. And, don't you know how that happens? All that sort of
Yep.
So profoundly, a big part of this story was sort of opening up that decision process for people to see that, no, actually, people do this for reasons, and they can say what their reasons are. And so they do this because they think it's really deeply good. Now, that shouldn't surprise anybody. Human beings pursue things that they think are deeply good. And they can be mistaken about what's deeply good. And that we know that happens all the time. But when they're not mistaken about what's deeply good, there's this kind of virtuous cycle that happens where you choose a thing that's good, and then it has tremendous meaning for you. And you think, well, I'm simultaneously grateful I did this thing. I'm proud of it too. It's a little bit like an accomplishment, but I'm also humbled by it. And then you want to do it again. And so I really wanted to capture that process. So you asked, what's the role of faith? Well, it turns out that in today's world, the vast majority of how people arrive at the idea that having children will be deeply good is through some articles of faith, some principles of faith, or we'd say the light of faith. These are certainly, and I had to investigate that, these are certainly not people who said to me, well, I have a lot of kids because the Pope says I should, or my rabbi says I should. It was much more so something that I would think of as like, it's a biblical principle. Like, children are a blessing from God. It's the most important thing I can do. Because, quoting someone, she said, well, because I'm religious, I know that this will be a relationship that's eternal. I love my son now. He's going to sometime make his own family and leave my house, but I will have a relationship with him forever. So those are the kinds of principles they articulated. Oftentimes it's what, like I said, got them started. So they think, why would I do this when nobody else is doing this? Well, my faith tells me that this is going to be a blessing. But then this virtuous cycle emerges where you have a bunch of kids, or you have a couple kids, you go, oh, actually, what God said is true. Now it's not just I believe it because the elders in my church said it, or because God said it, or because my mom, recommended having kids to me. And now I've had a couple and I see, oh, wow, this is deeply good. This is tremendously meaningful. And then it just kind of snowballs. You're like, okay, well, I'm all in now, right? This is great. There's no need to go back because we're open to this. We've built our life around this. We have the van. We already have the big car. I've already quit my job, whatever that is. So yeah, faith, I would say, played a really big role in terms of it most of the time. And I tell the story of the one woman for whom it's an exception. Faith isn't the big motivator for her. But it's usually the reason. It's it's the insight about kind of getting started on this lifestyle. And then there's the reasons that keep people going. I say how it started and how it's going. What keeps people going was much more often the experience being very affirming and very wonderful. And women saying things like, well, I didn't expect to love this much. But here I am on number 5. It's gotten easier. Here's 20 things I didn't know about having children that, man, if I would cry if I couldn't do this and I didn't realize, so those stories of how people kept going are different. But yeah, faith is really a story.
God said, be fruitful and multiply. And you get a lot of people that claim they live their life by biblical principles. But when you really get to know them, sometimes they're picking and choosing. That's in the Bible that we're supposed to be procreating. And it's also a great way, values are something that this show is grounded in. It's a way to promote your values. It's a way to grow your values, compound your values. There's so much good there in having more kids, and you never meet someone that says, well, I wish I didn't have that one more or whatever. They're always fine with it and it all works out in the end.
No, and Joey, we'll delete Joey.
Yeah, right, right. Sometimes we want to do that, but on the grand scheme of things. So there's a lot of talk right now on the left and the right, actually, about declining birth rates, aging population, sort of this baby bust. I think that too much of this talk is sort of done at a 30,000 foot level through policy papers and spreadsheets and whatnot. Your book brings everything back to the human level, which I think is really where we need to focus these conversations. We're actually talking about having more humans here. We need to focus on the human element. What's being missed in this current birth rate debate, and what can the women in your book teach us?
Yeah, definitely. I think what's being missed is the drama of I will say the decision that couples have to make. There's a drama there. I want to avoid sort of, it's just a women's choice. I don't think that, but there's a real drama there There's a decision. There's a kind of, I like to say that couples, husbands and wives, have an office, like it's more than just a duty. It's sacred, right? And this is the way we think about this in our faith. And that's that. No one else can do that decision for them. They have to, and like, thank goodness. I mean, I wouldn't want people to wake up in the morning and think like I feel less responsibility for this decision because I didn't make it, right? So this is really important. So what's being missed is that drama. And what do people do when they make decisions? And of course, when you start to get it out of your mouth, you think, well, you mean you had to write a book to say that? But actually, yeah, because actually the most important things are also they're simple. I mean, right? We say God is very simple, and we make it complex, right? So what's simple about this is that at the end of the day, couples deciding to have a child have to see that the good outweighs the bad, just like with everything else that we do. So what's really important is how they perceive the goods and the bads, right? And so that's what I try to bring to the reader, is that there are different ways of assessing the goods and the bads related to having children, right? If you think, career accomplishment is the most important thing, or it's very, very high up on the totem pole of things you want to accomplish in your life, then missing out on that will be a bad. That will be something you would put in the bad column. You're like, well, should we have another kid? I don't know. Like, will I make partner? Okay, so that's the sort of bad. So people can be really different on the way they assess those things. All right. Well, then the next point you started out was like on the right, on the left. We're having this conversation. We are having that conversation, and the conversation is basically skipping past that couples have to make this decision and they assess the goods and the bads. And what's happening, just like what I just mentioned, is the things that are on the good column and the things that are on the bad column when it comes to having children, they are not typically short-term financial things, right? The bads in the bad column today are like, I won't be able to do as much professionally. We won't be able to travel as much. Our car will be an ugly, bad car, right? Those are literally things people say. I remember people in college saying it. I remember girls in college saying 3 was the maximum number of children they wanted, because by 4 you had to not have a 5-seater car. And I remember just thinking, wow, like I can't imagine making a life decision on that. But here's the thing, people are interesting. Human beings are fascinating. And so what you really want to dig into is, what do people put in the good column and the bad column? Okay, so then what's happening in the policy world is all these strange things coming to the table. How can we get people to do more of this? We want more children. We don't have enough children. And so people are grasping at kind of ridiculous ways to add value to the good column. But of course, they're really limited. And this is why it comes back to values. It comes back to like, what do people think is in the good column? And as I just said, if you think that like eternal life is in the good column, you think like having a relationship with this profound human being forever and ever and ever, ever is in the good column. I mean, isn't that a little bit more motivating than sort of like, well, I'll set back in my career, and what is in the good column over here is like, I don't know, like maybe I'll get a bumper sticker that says like I saved the planet from fertility destruction. Like that's not that motivating, right? So that's what's being missed. And whether or not those goods and bads that are being assessed by people, how accurate are they? Do they have good information when they form the good and the bads that they think about? And can we really, and to what extent can we influence them, or should we try to influence them?
You bring up career.
Yeah.
Motherhood, fatherhood is a vocation.
Yeah.
And it's maybe our most important vocation if we're parents. I'd say it is. And so this is sort of a great segue into what I want to talk about next. So many people, and I think young people especially, they see children as a burden, something that's going to limit their freedom, take away their independence. But if you read your book, Hannah's Children, you sort of uncover something paradoxical. These women talk about motherhood, giving them more purpose, giving them more freedom, more fulfillment. And it comes through sacrifice. I think that's something that's so understood. Sacrifice isn't the opposite of joy. It's a path to joy. The world tells us that, freedom is never being tied down, but parents know better than that. They know that real freedom is found in giving yourself to something greater than yourself. The women in your book are not martyrs. They're radiant. So I'd like you to sort of talk about sacrifice and sort of unpacking the idea around how actually sacrificing for something other than yourself is a freeing concept.
Right. Yeah. So this is such a deep question and such an important question. For me, the way I talked about it in the book and the way I've tried to communicate it since the book came out, is really leaning into things where people see that in their life. I mean, I think sacrifice and purpose, I think team and sports is a great way to think about this, because as soon as you put it in that context, people kind of get it. The difference is just that, with a team, it's something that is temporary and that you can like join and leave, right? So that's really the only difference. But in terms of the role of sacrifice, we all see this, right? Is like, if I don't join this team, I play my role, and my role is almost like your vocation, right? I got that role, whatever. I'm not really good at any sports, so I can't easily do this, but you are. So, so when you think about that, but you think, well, I'm going to play my role, and it's going to require a lot of sacrifice, because if I don't discipline myself, not just myself, right? We can all imagine that football player who's like off, got a great regimen, like eating whatever the right thing is, like lifting. But if he doesn't discipline himself with the team, there are certain drills, there are certain plays we need to know, and he has to sacrifice maybe what he thinks is the best, the coach or whatever that looks like. If he doesn't do that, he won't be a great football player, because actually you can't be a great football player by yourself. That's just not a thing. And I think as soon as you say that, you're like, oh, yeah, that's true. You can't really be a great football player by yourself. It's a team sport. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? And so we can see, and there, you could probably think of examples for me that I cannot name, like people who would have been great if they could have just gotten behind the team thing. And they always wanted to do their own thing. They always wanted to be the coach when they're not the coach, whatever that is. And I think that's a piece of this, right? So that's kind of how I came to think about this. And so then when you talk about freedom being a fruit, and joy being a fruit of sacrifice, well, now you have to think about that thing where like you as a team, you accomplish the thing you set out to accomplish. You make that victory. Maybe you don't win. Maybe you just improve as a team, whatever that is. But you don't get the joy of that victory or that success if you don't go through that process. And there's just no other path. You don't get to be the star player if there's not a team, and if you didn't subordinate your own personal idea of things to the team. So I think we all get that. But what has happened in, the last, we could extend it out, 100 years, has been a little bit of collective forgetfulness, and a sense that, the family isn't something that that you do at the beginning of your life, and that you look back and you go like, without my husband, without my children, I would not be able to claim any of the joy and success and happiness I have today. We used to view it that way. We used to view it like as a thing you do right at the beginning of life. So people like Professor Wilcox talk about marriage as a foundation, right? But now we've kind of got this idea like you do all these things that you want to do, and then when you've done all those things, then you get married. And so we view marriage more as a kind of like a badge or like a cherry on top, rather than the foundation. And that is something that's gonna be hard to undo.
Yeah, we had Brad Wilcox on this show, and we talked a lot about marriage. And, I've always said, my formula for marriage is aligned vision, aligned values, complementary capabilities. You have to be able to offset each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I think kids are complementary. They're additive, but they're complementary to a marriage. I mean, there's still gaps in a family, and kids can fill those gaps in, especially when they get older. They can actually drive the other kids around and do those things for us.
For sure.
So you write in the book, these women aren't necessarily trying to prove a point. They're trying to live a life. Yeah. That hit me hard when I read the book. Yeah. We live in such a performative culture. Everyone's arguing online. Everyone has a metric to measure something. But, the women in your book seem to be winning something much deeper. They're sort of just quietly living out the dignity of their lives, and they're happier. How did that line come to you? I mean, what does it mean to live that way in this cultural moment of and cultural movement of social media, and everyone's bragging about their wins and all this sort of stuff? What does the quiet dignity of motherhood mean?
Yeah. So quietly defying the birth dearth. Why did I say quiet? I couldn't have titled it otherwise, right? Because if you just say these are women who are bucking the trend or doing something different, and now it sounds like you're describing a movement or a protest or something like that. But it is definitely not a political movement. Definitely not an intention. Not doing a thing to own the libs. Right? So like this, which I'm like, that's actually the best example. Right.
You can say that on this show.
Yeah, exactly. They're not doing this to own the libs. And this is really important. I get called all the time. Like the New York Times is calling, the Washington Post is calling, and they want to know like, is this a movement? And I actually don't think it's a movement. I mean, I think there are elements today of our political order. People are asking these questions, and maybe that will develop into a political movement. But the people who I describe in this book do not believe they're part of a movement. They're not organized. They don't have like a lobby group. They don't, and they really don't, they are quietly doing these things. I had to emphasize that in part, I think they're doing a thing that they think is good. They think it's humble. They would describe themselves as blessed. They even tripped over saying that they felt accomplished. And there's a story I tell about that because it really kind of reveals the heart of a lot of these women, which the one woman said, I'm really proud that I have these children. They're like my best accomplishments. And then the other woman says, like, would I call them my accomplishments? I don't really know. And they're really humble about it. They really feel like at the end of the day, although yes, there's a lot of sacrifice and a lot of hard work, their children are who they are and their blessings, and that they are just so happy to have received them. So yeah, they're just living their life. They're not trying to prove a point. Oftentimes, the women I interviewed didn't even know that the birth rate was so low. So they're definitely not choosing a thing in order to save the world. And I think that's really important because actually, like, in our lifetimes, if we do save the world, it will come about through the way we treat the 5 people we owe our love and fidelity to, right? And that will save the world, but not because we tried to help all those other people.
Right.
That oftentimes goes wrong.
There's so much noise in culture right now over what a woman is. I mean, there's actually a documentary, I know the makers of it, called What is a Woman? And senators have been asked when they testify. A Supreme Court justice testified and couldn't answer the question, what is a woman? I think that many in society have done this on purpose. They put, boys and girls sports. We've sort of lost respect for femininity. Right. It was a good word. It's a bad word. It's a good word. But I think motherhood does a good job of sort of centering our culture around the role of a woman. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Motherhood, it's a deep concept. So you mentioned, like, we've lost, like, what even is a woman, something you said earlier really, I think, is the best way to think about this. You talked about how in a marriage, values are aligned, but complementary things. Right?
Aligned vision, aligned values, complementary capabilities.
All right. So right there, complementary capabilities. I mean, this is, I think, the best way to think about motherhood and fatherhood. And that is deeper and beyond these sort of stereotypical things, right? So there's one couple I interviewed whose story is in the book where he stays home with the kids and she works 2 days a week as a pediatrician. I don't know that that's the best thing for everybody to do, but like they still live a very traditional idea of kind of like, he's still the dad. He's not the mom. Like, she's the mom. Right. But that arrangement financially for them in terms of the flow of their household, they did a lot of sports in that family. He was a golf dad, is my recollection. They did a lot of sports. So he was doing things that are very dad-like things. But the point is that the complementary capabilities that you mentioned, the most complementary thing you could be is like a male and a female, right?
We're breaking news.
We're breaking news. And it's like very complementary, right? We have completely different capabilities. And that difference in capability comes from the spirit. It doesn't first come from our body parts. Now, of course, we've got all these really tragic cases where people don't feel at home, and they're missing this thing. So you can't turn that off. You can't and so what is this capability? This is like amazing, right? This capability. Women, we know this. Women mother all kinds of things, right? They mother their children beautifully. It goes awry when they try to mother the wrong stuff, right? And this could happen. You see women mothering their husbands when they really should be loving their husbands.
Well, that happens in my house a lot.
To some extent, right? Right. But it can turn sour, right? But it's because why? Because we really have this like amazing muscle to mother things. And I think everybody gets it. We just come out of Mother's Day, thinking about that. But at the end of, so sometimes say to young couples, like, at the end of the day, you're a guy, she's a girl, you're going to be fine because you've got different capabilities. And those different capabilities are both going to translate into your strengths as a couple, but they're also going to keep drawing you together. And this is why we've seen that, like, same-sex partnerships are not as stable, right? Because actually, at the end of the day, you kind of have the same capabilities.
Yeah.
Right.
And
you don't need each other.
In a society that, loves diversity and everybody wants to talk about diversity, we don't want to talk about the diverse roles of a man and a woman. We were created a certain way and we do complement each other, to keep using that word.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to these younger individuals. I think we really need to reach them when it comes to this conversation. Now, on the bright side, the data is starting to show that younger women, especially conservative women,
Yeah.
are much more open to having children, having larger families. But you go online and they're mocked. You look in the media, they're sort of isolating these women. So what would you say to, I think I said 22-year-old, what would you say to a young 22-year-old woman who wants a big family but feels alone in this journey?
Right. Well, I would hand her my book. That's the first thing I would do. No, and I would say that like a little bit. I'm actually a little bit serious, not just, but who feels alone in the journey. I mean, I think first of all, it's like absolutely essential to find people. For me, even as a young woman, young wife, we joined a new church, and just like finding those people who were just a little bit ahead of me. They weren't maybe as old as my parents, but they had a couple kids already. And I was like, okay, like what is marriage like when you have a couple kids? Like I didn't know yet. What is it like to combine these things? What is it like to have to put your kids in the car and drive around? So definitely find community. Like I think that's the number one thing. This country, as much as, there's a lot of bad news out there, we have a lot of strong communities. And that's part of the good news behind this book is actually everywhere. This isn't just like, oh, it's only happening in Florida, or it's only every state that you look at, every city that you go to, you are going to find that there are people, and they're going to typically attached to a church. So if you're that young person, you feel like you don't know where to find these people, find the churches. And this is like, there's nothing new under the sun. Like these people are in a church someplace. We know that the college years and the pre-family years for most people is when they're least attached to churches. And part of that's how we do college in this country, which has got its pros, but it's got some real downsides. Like when you're in college, even if you're in a religious community, you're not in a regular parish where there are men and women and children. You're like in a campus ministry or something. And I am of the opinion that needs to start to change. Because what happens is college students go to a place where they don't see older people and they don't see couples and they don't see children for 4 years at a time in their life when they're making enormous decisions about what they'll do for the rest of their lives. So like that's a bizarre situation. We're kind of setting them up to like not remember that maybe at some point I might want to have kids. And actually we're so present biased, most of us, right? We do things that are like immediately good,
Short-term
gratification, totally, that you can think about all these like 18 to 22-year-olds who just nobody reminded them. And like literally like the 22-year-olds that I talk to, they say, what's the one thing I could do? I'm like, choose an occupation where you could be flexible, because you may not want a baby right now, but you might get married in a few years. Hopefully you do. And you're going to all of a sudden be like, actually, flexibility would be great. But no one said to you when you were 22, be like set yourself up for flexibility. So I think that's the key thing. It's finding the mentors, finding those communities where people are doing this, being present to being around people with kids. And then, maybe we need to start a little bit more creatively thinking about how we educate our college students.
And people in our position have an obligation to share our lived experiences with others and share the joy that these things in life bring us to those younger generations. They can go searching for these examples, but if we don't provide them for them, like your book does, like hopefully this show does, then we're not doing our part as well. My dad, and by the way, a professor at Catholic University, I mean, there are not a lot of professors out there that talk like you do, that promote what you do. So we're grateful for your work there. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
My dad told me when I was 22, graduating college, he said, you need to build a life plan. And I said, well, what the heck is that? And he goes, well, you need to break your life down into all the buckets that are important. Your faith, your career, your social relationships, your health. And then what you need to do is find people, build your goals into that, and then go find people that have achieved those goals 5, 10, and 20 years later. You find someone that you wake up in 20 years and say, I want to live just like that person. Backtrack their steps to when they were your age. So those are the examples we need to be providing to the individuals that are 22 years old that think they want to have kids but feel alone. They're not alone. There's a whole world out there that's experiencing this joy. We need to bring that to them. All right, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say this. I mean, this is what your dad said. I mean, couldn't be more important, which is study success. Literally study success. And we continue to treat love and marriage and childbearing as if it's something that happens to you and not something that you choose. But of course, we know that it's something that you choose. It's something that you can choose. Thanks be to God, freedom isn't as alive as it used to be in this country, but we still have a lot of freedom, right? Like nobody's stopping you. It's free. These things are actually free. And I'm glossing over some details. But What we do this in other areas of life where it matters, like career-wise, you're going to go to high school, you're going to be assigned like a college counselor, and then you go to college and they're going to give you a career counselor. Where's the family counselor? Where's the, and I'm not saying you need a counselor, but that principle is often we just expect that family things are just going to happen. We don't need to train for them. We don't need to plan for them. But when we think about all the other things we do, now we know, like, if you want to eat right, if you want to get fit, if you don't want to be lazy, like there's a lot of things you can do. Just think about like habit formation and how now we've got coaches who can help us think about how to form your habits. And like, actually, why don't you look at this?
Yeah.
Maybe a reason you're not effective is because, your habits are terrible. Well, can you fix that? Isn't that just something that happens to you? I mean, I know a lot of 18-year-olds will be like, I'm just not that person, right? I'm not that person.
Yeah.
And then of course we've seen now like, oh, actually this is defective thinking, and you can learn. So, okay, you're just not that person who met the right actually, there's like 10 steps you can take.
Yeah.
And that I'm actually incredibly optimistic that a whole culture of that is happening now. We're the beginning of it. This podcast, other podcasts, a lot of influencers who are trying intentionally to influence the culture around the path to marriage and the path to having kids. Because as a matter of fact, in this country, we build things. And as a matter of fact, we've course corrected on a lot of things that we did wrong, right? So this might be the most important thing. But I'm actually really optimistic that we can fix this.
Yeah, everybody's arguing for more financial literacy taught in our schools. Why don't we teach family literacy and how to have parents? Now, there's a role on the parents, but not every kid is blessed with a home with loving parents that can teach them these things.
Right.
We just need to be promoting these things. When Brad Wilcox was on the show, we were talking about marriage, and he was going through all these statistical data that you can't argue, that screams in your face that people that are married make more money. They're happier, they live longer, they have more sex. If you took that to a 20-year-old in college and said, do you want to do all these things? I have a magic pill. I mean, come on, wake up. We just need to be better at promoting these things. All right, so something I really want to ask you about, because it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Sure.
It's something that's very current in the news right now. You're an economist, and there are all these talks of tax subsidies and ways that the government can promote us having more children. But if you look at sort of the population problems that other countries have had and all the government solutions that they've tried to implement to increase the population, they don't work. You can't pay people to have more babies. You have to motivate them culturally to do so. So I see this more of a spiritual incentive than a financial incentive, but as an economist, but also a woman of very strong faith, I'd love for you to weigh in on this.
Yeah. I mean, I think you put it perfectly. That's really my conclusion. It's not that
Thank you.
It's not that incentives don't matter. Incentives do matter.
Sure.
It's just what kind of incentives,
That's
right? Because this is not another analogy I've used. I mean, it's sports, but another analogy I've used is like joining the military. Like having a family, committing to kids is like joining the military. It's a complete life change. Turns out that you can't really incentivize people to join the military very easily. It turns out you have to put huge numbers on that. And even with that, a lot of countries really struggle to get people to sign up. Now, it's similar in the sense that, what do you need to like sign up to join the military? You have to like be sort of service oriented. You got to love your country. You got to have a lot of spiritual ideals in a sense, like spiritual. Having kids is like that. So it turns out, first of all, that the incentives don't work. Those incentives don't work. There are incentives that work. I say these are the things that tip the scales for people. The important thing about that, I think there's a lot of pieces to that. I mean, of course, there's like we could have a whole, probably like we could do hours of the folly of these sort of government programs. Oftentimes we find that after these government programs are put in place to provide direct incentives to have kids, they don't work. And oftentimes at the end, we find that the birth rate is even lower than at the beginning. Well, maybe if you start to convince people that it is a financial thing, you can actually chip away at the way the need that they have to see it as a spiritual thing. So you can actually do damage with these things. You can not just fail at your objective, you could do damage. And I mean, that's a great subject. And there's so many other ways you're like, where else has this failed, right? Like, where have we failed to do this? But what it also highlights too is that the most powerful motivator to do something that is really hard is really love, right? You got to love it. And we could also like rephrase that. It's like, you got to want it, right? And we know this is like what gets you over there? Those guys that are climbing Mount Everest, I don't want to do that. Like, looks miserable to me, but like they love it. They love whatever the whole package. It's beautiful. It's obviously a tremendous accomplishment, but there's something else that, like people write books about. There's like why we climb mountains, like why do we have this thing in us that wants to summit great heights? Because you're going to rip apart your body to do that, right? You're going to and people ask you this all the time. They're like, your body is a mess probably after all those kids, yeah, sure. But that's not what, it's like not the right place, right? The place is what gets you to want to get up the summit. So that's the things like what we know about government intervention in things that are not, we'll say not proper functions of the government. So now I'm going to make a claim, right? That there are things that are proper functions of government. Having a strong national defense is a proper function of government, and nobody else can do that. But what we know about government intervention into things that are not proper functions of government is that the effect of the government action is asymmetrical. The government can get in the way. It can block and disincentivize and make obstacles to people doing the things that they want to do and that they love to do and want to do, and that they should do, that they're obligated to do in a sense. But the government is very limited in making it happen. So the way I like to put it is like if you had a bunch of people who wanted to run up Mount Everest, or let's tell a different story. If you had a bunch of people that wanted to run a marathon, which is what you need. If you want to have a bunch of people have kids, it's like they've got to have that mindset. Like I'm in this for a lot, training, all this, so many hours. Like I'm always baffled. Like who does this? But suppose you had a whole bunch of people at the start line and they're ready to go. Could you stop them? Of course you could stop them. You could show up and you could kneecap a whole bunch of them. They're not running a marathon. You just hit them in the knees, right? You take the shoes off. Like there's a million things you could do. But now let's tell a different story. Let's suppose you got nobody at the start line. And the government's like, well, we've been kneecapping people for so many years. Now nobody's even showing up to run this race. We know what we're going to do. We're going to we're going to hand out sneakers. We're going to get more people to sign up. Like, no, like no one would sign up to run a marathon because you gave new sneakers. Like this is ridiculous. But this is, I'm being a little glib, but actually you think about like the whole sort of misadventure of state family planning. You think about the one-child policy in China, and they did successfully keep people from having children. And now that that's over, they cannot get people to have children, right? Because it's not symmetrical. They can block it off, but they can't call it forth. So what's missing now, right, is we've got this conversation, like incentivize people, get it done. Like we'll just pass out some candy and people will do this. And you're like, no, what you really have to investigate is what happened to that drive to have children. Like, why isn't it there? Was it always there? Did you maybe have a hand in wrecking it? And I do think in some cases we could certainly point to that. And what do I mean there? Have a hand in killing it? Well, like, I don't know, suppose the state comes along and says, look, it used to be that you depended on your children to take care of you in your old age. That was fine. It was kind of old fashioned, but like we feel bad for people who don't have kids, or we feel bad for people who are really poor. So we're going to tax everybody. We got an idea. Everybody's going to put a little bit in the pot. And then we're just going to let everybody who doesn't have old age support draw in this pot. Well, that's a function of the families taking care of our old people and our young people. And so if you set that system up and you're really good at it, and you're really efficient, and you transfer a lot of money, or you little by little, you raise that. It's not 1% anymore. It's going to be 5%, 10%. Now it's 15%. You're to take that out of people's income and you're to say, we're going to give this to everybody, regardless of whether you had kids. Does that maybe remove some of the drive to have children? Probably does. And we could keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a significant difference between a handout and a hand up.
Yeah.
It's the old Ronald Reagan model. The government can provide a hand up, teach a man to fish, not just give him fish. You can't just, there's a difference between an incentive and a gift. And when the government gifts us things, we take them for granted and don't learn anything from that.
Right.
Two takeaways from what you said. I run 2 marathons. If I ever get to the starting or the start line for my third one, I do hope someone breaks my kneecaps because I'm never running another marathon again. You also compared having children to joining the military. And I can tell you that about 8 p.m. every night in my house, it does feel like I'm living in a Marine barracks. So that's a very, on point analogy there.
Yeah.
All right, so we're often told that declining birth rates are just this social trend, and there aren't really any real costs when society stops having children, but there are costs. There are spiritual costs. There's cultural costs. There's economic cost to society.
Yeah.
What does a future without the family look like?
Yeah. Well, maybe the best image would be, people talk about these towns where, kind of the jobs have gone away. We're being treated to these stories all the time, right? Because of this concern about kind of a hollowing out of a lot of rural America. But that's actually what it looks like when there aren't children. And that's the untold part, the other cause, right? So people say, well, the jobs went away. Actually, people stopped having kids in these places. And nobody ever examines that part. They treat it like it was this big like machinery of global trade, and now like nobody has jobs anymore. And that's a long, nuanced story, and I've got thoughts about that. But what also happened, and it happened before the global trade thing happened, was that all across this country, people stopped having children on purpose. They didn't want as many children as their parents had. And when really good birth control came around in the 1960s, everybody wanted that. That looked like a good deal to them. It was like, we could control this better. We don't have to like give up the sex. We could still have all the sex and not as many children. And like, why would we do that? So they didn't have values that were actually that pro-family. They really actually wanted smaller families. No, I'm not blaming anybody, but I'm saying it's a descriptive fact. The thing that we think of as economic decline was led by family decline before it was economic decline.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it look like? It looks like, the place that you used to, you'd go to the Hardee's or the Waffle House, and now you drive by, like the Waffle House is shuttered up and there's nobody wants to work that job. I mean, that's kind of what the future looks like. Not that we've ever seen this before, but you can't have a whole bunch of businesses offering services with nobody to work those jobs and services. So it really will look, economically, it will look like, we'll just say stagnation at best and decline at worst. That is one thing. But as you point out, that's not the most important thing, actually. Like, that so be it, right? Nobody's ever promised us prosperity. This country's been the most prosperous place on earth for a long, long time, and I hope that continues. But you sort of like in your moments, you think like, well, that's not promised to us. Okay, so I hope it continues. Politically, when people are not having children, what happens is that people feel that their way of life is under threat, and they become instinctively more concerned about like people with different ways of life. So what I'm kind of pointing out is that there is definitely a piece which is a little bit, we could say tribal, a little bit nationalistic, which comes about from declining birth rates. Because now people, you think about those years when this country welcomed like all the Italian immigrants and all the Irish immigrants. So like that was a moment, and there were political reasons for that. But people didn't feel threatened by that, not in the same way that they maybe sometimes do today. So there's political tension that comes from this. And then the third thing, which is the most important, is for a given population size, for a country of a given size, when family sizes are smaller, it means fewer brothers and sisters, fewer aunts and uncles, and kind of that sense that like your family you have a deep bench on your family, which that's so important, right? I've got brothers that I fought with for years, and I've needed them for so many things. And like today, I'm like, well, what would my life look like without that brother, that brother? This is a very deep bench. And it's good to have a deep bench, because what you don't, you need the government. Like that's the next source, right? It's like, well, you don't have a lot of siblings, you don't have aunts and uncles, and so it does warp the way we think about government, where we start to think about the government as more like the daddy than like the thing that it has its place, but it isn't the meaning of life. And so it warps all of these things. So there's a loss of human connection, a loss of family life. And then, this kind of perversion, this kind of slow creep of a type of communism, or a type of, we can even say a type of fascism, where we begin to think of the social community, the impersonal collective, as like doing and providing for us the things that like your brothers should be able to do for you. And, people always say, well, what about the person who doesn't have a brother? Well, okay, don't give me the hard case. Like if you set things up where the assumption is you won't have a brother to take care of you, you will not have brothers to take care of you, right? And this could continue in that direction. So what we have to do is begin to sort of reflect on these things, and then kind of inch our way back. We really have to wean ourselves off of that kind of like that thing where we say, there's really no problem if the government does for you what your brother's supposed to do for you.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned two words there, connection and community. I mean, people that are connected to others in a community live more fulfilled lives. They live happier lives. I mean, anyone that goes through life isolated is just a less happy person.
Right.
And I can't think of the two most important communities in my life are my Catholic Church and my family.
Right.
And we turn to community for everything in life. Why wouldn't you want to have your own community under your roof to live life with?
Right.
All right, so our show is called We the People because we believe that America's problems are not solved in Washington, D.C. They're solved at the kitchen table. They're solved in the church pew. And your book points people out, highlights the stories of people that are taking ownership and accountability of their lives. So in all your work and in light of today's conversation, what gives you hope?
Yeah. So I think that although the problem in front of us in terms of marriage and family is profound and troubling, I'm actually incredibly optimistic. I actually think that what's in this book and the research I'm going to continue doing, I think it's the most hopeful thing that we have in front of us, because if you need to wait around for some kind of like political, social, economic revolution, you need to wait for your favorite party to get elected in Washington, right? You need to wait for your party that you favorite to get around to doing the right thing. You're going to be waiting a long time, right? But if what you need to do is spread information and people can act on that information, conversions happen every day, right? You converted, right? I converted in a manner of speaking, right? I needed to be reconverted to know what I believed and then to commit my life to it. And this can happen in a minute, right? So what gives me tremendous hope is that at least half of the people I interviewed for this project did not arrive at their adult lives wanting to build a great family. And then because of meeting somebody, a religious experience, an encounter, they said, wait a minute, this is like the most important thing, and now I'm going to do this thing. That's tremendously hopeful. And it actually tells you that sort of like, if the problem is spiritual, and if the problem is it's not a Washington, D.C. problem, which we know it's not something that they can try to solve. They can try to get votes that way, but they can't solve the problem. Well, if that's true, then actually we can make a tremendous difference by just having this conversation. I did not write this book to persuade people to have children or to convince them this would be a great way to live. I wrote this book to try to essentially bring information to the table for those policymakers about to go down a very strange path. But here's something that's happened. Since this book came out, I just get emails every week from people who say, I didn't know this was a way you could live. I didn't know. I thought that in order to have a big, beautiful family, you had to hate to work or hate careers or education. You had to like give up all the parts of feminism that I'm attached to, right? And they didn't know. And then they write, they're like, we're going to go for it. We stopped at one. I heard you on the Federalist. We're not really like religious people, but we're conservative. We're going to go for a second. And you're like, okay, I believed before I wrote this book that information is really the most powerful thing. Information that is true is not propaganda. It's always really important to think about this, right? Because of course, like the historic evil regimes of the world, right? Whether it's, ones that we remember in the last 100 years or the ones that existed in the ancient times, really evil regimes. We know that what they do is they try to spread information. We tend to think of that as having a bad connotation. Like, you shouldn't try to convince anybody of anything. I don't actually want to convince anybody of anything. I just want to provide information. This is true information. And because the truth has really, and it's powerful and attractive, it's like, I don't even need to tell you, like, maybe consider having a second kid. They read it and they go, sign me up. Like, where can I go? Oh, I'm going to reverse this procedure. Oh, what could I do to have another kid? And that has honestly been a surprise to me. It's been confirming, but also tremendously hopeful. So now I just think that the most hopeful thing we have is that this is imminently possible. People's plans for their family lives are maximally changeable. I mean, goodness, they change on a dime. So, okay. So then I think, like, how can I get a bigger platform? Like, how could I get this to more people?
Yeah.
And this is what you're doing, of course, not just with this podcast, with all the other guests that you've had and all the other great podcasters that are out there kind of trying to spell. I mean, so in a sense, although I think some parts of our culture have never been worse off, I think I've, in my adult lifetime, never been as hopeful that we would see a very profound change.
Yeah, hope is definitely a theme of this show. We like people to absorb the content and have key takeaways that bring hope and joy back to their lives, back to their communities. I'm hopeful because there are people like you doing this work, shining a light on it. Our friend Brittany off screen with her school bus in the parking lot. I'm hopeful
Yep.
Because there's mothers like that in the world, not afraid to have more children and brag about it.
Yeah.
Tell our audience where they can find you, how they can get the book.
That's great. So the book's on Amazon. As of the time of this recording, it's on a deep sale. So that's a great thing. Amazon's probably the best place to find it. Of course, the publisher has it. Skyhorse, Regnery, Barnes & Noble, all the places you get books, as they say. I'm online at pacolic.com. It's a pretty modest website. I'm on X. Try to post pictures of my kids a lot and occasionally comment on bad policies, but mostly post pictures of my kids. But stay tuned. The next book is coming. The next project, I'm going to interview dads and hopefully tell a completely different
very
story.
Cool.
Yeah,
okay, I didn't know that.
Yep, that's hopefully coming. It'll take.
We'll have you back.
Yes, I know. So this is going to be great. I think the men's side is going to be equally sort of shocking and interesting. And where on the women's side, you're really engaging with those questions of kind of feminism and career and can women still make a choice for kids in spite of the fact that there are so many other great things they can do? Do you have to hate all those things? You can still love those things, but just love kids more.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the way I like to put it. This isn't about rejecting the good things the world has to offer. It seems to be about loving your kids more, loving the opportunity to have children more. And actually, it's never been easier to sort of combine a lot of cool interests with having children. So that's a really hopeful thing. The dad's book, the real sort of question to start to engage is what's the relationship between dad's success, male success, and having children. We have seen a shocking loss of engagement in the workforce in men in the last 50 years, whereas women's labor force participation was rising, males' labor force participation was falling. And there's a lot of narratives out there about that, a lot of scapegoats, but we really don't have a deep dive. We don't have a deep insight. Like, we haven't sat down with the dads and so, like, do your kids make you a better man? And how much more successful do you think you are because your kids? Or is it really the other way around? The kids really drained you out. They wrecked you. And that, of course, I expect it's going to go one way there. I mean, I expect what I'm going to hear is a lot of really interesting stories about the ways in which kids make their dads more successful and better, want to be a better man. One mom in the book said, well, when you have a lot of kids with a man, he either becomes a jerk or a rock star. And she said, like, my husband went the right way. He's a rock star now. And you're like, that's so great. That's golden. And so we have been used in this culture, in our discourse, and this isn't wrong, to thinking about the ways in which we need to do better for our children. And so that's the whole discourse around children, is how do we, it's so rightly, we think about 2 parents are needed for your children, and give them the good education, give them good food. Now we're doing the whole Maha thing. Like, are we giving the kids a bad food? And we're thinking about our duty to provide something good for our kids. But the piece that's missing there is, well, what are our children providing to us? In what ways do our children save our lives? In what ways do they help me to be the person that I never thought I could be? And so that's, not to denigrate that first part, but in a world that doesn't see the value of children, that's where you got to go. Because people think it's all just me giving. It's like, no, actually you're the recipient, and it's so much bigger than what you give. And we know that from so many other parts of life. And I'm so deeply convicted now that's kind of the gospel of children. The good news about children is that no matter how much you give them, they're going to give you more.
Yeah.
And so just kind of getting into that. So I am so excited to hear what that looks like and sounds like from the dad's perspective. So I think it'll be a very different book. We don't know what the title's going to be yet. Just starting to do interviews this summer.
Well, I love that. I mean, the only thing I'll add is that being a dad makes me a better person, because I always have the assumption that they're watching me. And if I didn't have that assumption, I'm not like the world's greatest person, but I wouldn't be as good a person as I am. I mean, even little things like praying before dinner. Would I do that? I hope I would do that if I was alone in the room, but sometimes I do it because my children are there. They need to see this. So I'm actually living an act out because I know I'm being watched. So they make me a better person, and they don't even know it. So
that is huge. I'm going to take that into my interviews. You're just giving me a good question to ask.
This was awesome. The other place people can find you is Catholic University.
That is true.
I'm a proud alum. So send all your kids to Catholic University and take Catherine's course. But Catherine, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
We the people. Why you quiet? It's time to stand up for the truth. How they coming for our kids, so who gon' stand up for the youth? Ay, and we know we win because Yeshua is the proof. Ay, we the people like Garcia, so that's no excuse.